Lesson 1: Problems and Challenges for Teens. Welcome to Part 1, Lesson 1. We begin this course with Part 1, which examines some of the problems and challenges that you as a teenager may experience. In Part 2, we will explore some solutions that are valuable not only through teenagehood but throughout your life. In Part 3, we will investigate how these solutions help you personally, as well as your worldview of life in general. So, having given you the overall course direction, let's begin now with Lesson 1, some of the difficulties of teenagehood. But before I begin, pause this video lesson and get pen and paper. Push play when you are ready to continue. Life as a human being doesn't come with a clear roadmap because we all have different circumstances to deal with. Some teens live in war zones where every day is filled with uncertainties and dangers. Some teens live in a safe, healthy environment. Other teens live in every situation in between. Irrespective of any of these circumstances, moving from childhood to adulthood has many challenges because each person's journey is as unique as the individual themselves. Here is a short list of some conventional problems that teens experience. They struggle and feel awkward with their changing appearance, switch between being overconfident to having poor self-confidence. They experience peer pressure to follow clothing trends and activities. They consider their parents don't understand them and find fault with everything that their parents do. And they revert to childish behaviour such as slamming doors and crying. Now pause this video lesson and write down any of these points that you can personally relate to in your life. Push play when you are ready to continue the lesson. Now, there are more concerning and dangerous problems that affect some teens, such as being either physically or cyber-bullied, or being the bully, frequent angry outbursts of extreme opposition to authority, excessive and addictive screen time on social media or playing video games, alcohol, drugs, smoking, and vaping, truancy, theft, or vandalism, fear of becoming obese even though their body weight might be normal, signs of depression, prolonged sad moods, hurting their bodies, and even thoughts of suicide. Pause the lesson and write down any of these points that you can personally relate to in your life. These notes are very private. Push play when you are ready to continue the lesson. So these are big subjects to address, especially in the second, more violent category. So first I would like to stop and talk about a brief history of the concept of teens. This history may surprise you and at the very least put a slightly different slant on the first category of problems. Let's begin with a brief history of the teen. Much like being a passenger in a plane or watching talking movies, the term teenager didn't really exist in the early 1900s. You were a child, then you got a job, and you were an adult. Kids in their teen years were a part of the workforce in factories and mines, or on their family farms, shops, and so on. Both young and older children naturally helped support their family, and the chores they did helped running the household. Kids usually only attended the early grades in school and often stopped because they were needed full-time on the family farm, or when they became old enough to work in a factory. Higher education did exist, but it was for professions such as lawyers, doctors, accountants, even priests, etc. And it was exclusively the province of the middle and upper classes. In 1954, the word teenager was a relatively new addition to our vocabulary. Although it first appeared prior to the Second World War, it only really caught on in common usage during the late 1940s. And by the 1950s, people were beginning to ask, what is a teenager? How do they behave? What should they wear? Some of the earliest mentions of the word teenager in the British newspaper archive are in relation to fashion. In 1945, a magazine called The Sketch featured several outfits under the title Teenage Triumphs. Humans have been turning 13 for countless thousands of years, but it was only in the 40s and the 50s that it occurred to anybody that the bridge between childhood and adulthood might have its own name. Thus, the teenager emerged in the middle of the 20th century thanks to the confluence of four components: education, economics, availability of cars, and that sounds strange, and technology. So let's look at them. 1. The rise of compulsory education. For example, as the US economy shifted from a more localized agrarian society to a mass production machine, families relocated closer to cities. And at least initially, many sent their children to work in the factories. This triggered a counter-movement to prevent kids from being forced to work in the mills. The solution? Compulsory public education for kids. As young people spent more time in school, they developed their own customs in an environment away from work and the family, where they could have their own social rules. So this was quite new to society. Number 2, the post-war economic boom. A serious commercial interest in teenagers didn't begin in earnest until after World War II. To entice marketers, teenagers needed money, so they're not of any attraction to people marketing their products. And that money would come from two principal sources: the labour force and the parents. The 1950s saw one of the great periods of economic expansion in American history. With full employment came rising wages for unionised adults and older teenage workers. Now you can understand the connection, yeah? So the teenagers are getting paid well. Meanwhile, parents gradually had fewer children and spent more per child. Since the 1970s, the richest 20% of US households have more than doubled their spending on childhood enrichment, such as summer camps, sports, tutors. So if we look back to the earlier years before World War II, this was not normal to be spending so much money on their children. But nowadays, modern culture is fully teenocratic, governed by the tastes of young people, with older people forever playing catch-up. Number 3, the invention of the car. Now, this is the one that you'd think, well, what's that got to do with teenagers? But it might be a horrifying consideration for today's singles. But a first date once meant an introductory chat in the living room with a girl's parents. And this might have been followed by a very awkward family dinner. But cars emancipated romance from the stilted small talk of the family parlour. Just about everything a modern single person, and that includes teenagers, considers to be a date was made possible by the invention and normalisation of car-driven romance. Cars didn't just hasten an historical shift from teenage codependence to independence. They fed the growth of a high school subculture. And now we understand this introduction of everybody having cars, the normalisation of car ownership. In high schools, kids own cars. They can travel about, they can pick up their dates, they can go and do anything that they want to do because they have a car. So in the past, when students, teenagers were going to school, they had to walk all the way there. But when buses could drive students farther from their homes, one-room schoolhouses gave way to large buildings filled with teeming hordes of adolescents and their hormones. The fall of the farming economy and the rise of mandatory education combined to create a teenage culture. I found that very fascinating. I hope you did. Now, the fourth one, social media and teens. So much has been written about this. At the end of the 20th century, with the influence of advertising, many teens gravitated to logos. The economic expansion from the 1980s and the 1990s gave them the economic means to spend lavishly on clothing emblems. A fashion hit was based not only on the quality of the garment, but also on the logo's talismanic power in high school hallways. In recent years, the smartphone screen displaced the embroidered logo as the focal point of teen identity. It was once sufficient to look good in a high school hallway, but today, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, they are all high school hallways. That is a very interesting way of looking at it. These are like digital high school hallways where young people perform and see performances, judge and are judged. The iPhone and its competitors offered new, nimble instruments of self-expression, symbols of independence, and better ways to hook up. And so, in just half a century, teenagers went from being a new classification of awkward youth to a valuable consumer demographic to be exploited. Teenagers are the market's most likely to accept new music, new clothing fashion, or a new technological trend. But all the advancements made for teenagers in those years, freedom of movement, education, economic gains, social media, which facilitates connecting with other teens worldwide, they have not resulted in a happier person than their 1940s predecessors. In fact, teenagers today are filled with anxieties and live in an epidemic of anguish. Because of social media, they spend less time with friends in person and are losing the art of personal communication. They are being bullied far more often than any time in history. So how can teens be helped through these bewildering times? Part 2 is all about personal keys that teens can use, not just for those turbulent 10 years or so, but for the rest of their life. Let's begin.